We're going to wait for 2 minutes for people to kind of drop in. Sometimes it takes about a minute or two for everybody to log in. All right. All right, well, let's get going. So hi, everybody. Very excited to see everybody on the podcast. We seem to have over 200 subscribers. So thank you guys for joining us today. We're going to talk about an interesting topic. We're going to talk about veterinary consolidation outlook, pushing beyond your current plateau. That's sort of the topic that we have. And I'm very excited to introduce our two very prominent speakers. So we have John Volk. He's a senior consultant at Brakke Consulting, the largest consulting firm serving the global animal health, veterinary, and pet care markets. John, if I can ask you to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Hi, thank you. I've been with Brakke Consulting since 1994, and have been following industry consolidation, kind of monitoring it for probably the last 20 years. And I've participated in about a dozen recapitalization events for consolidators as a consultant over the last 8 to 10 years. So very, very interesting topic, and glad to be here this morning.
Thank you for joining us. And we have Dr. Kurt Phillips. He's a founder and CEO of Cityway Animal Clinics. It's a network of 5 veterinary practices in downtown Indianapolis. Kurt, if I can ask you to give a couple words about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ivan. Kurt Phillips, Cityway Animal Clinics in Indianapolis, Indiana. Graduated from Purdue University School of Veterinary Medicine in 1996 and was fortunate enough to be able to purchase my first practice, the practice I was an associate at, in 1999 to early 2000. So a young entrepreneur at 29 and a half years of age who didn't know much, and was thrust into the entrepreneurship of business ownership, of veterinary business ownership, and have just really enjoyed the ride ever since.
Excellent. Thank you for that introduction. And today, so one sort of housekeeping item. If you guys, the visitors, if you want to post any questions, please use the chat box on the channel that you're watching this on. We have a team that's picking up the questions, and then it will present them to us towards the end. So please feel free to ask anything is interesting to you. And today we're going to discuss what's going on in the veterinary consolidation space and what is the future of it. Obviously a very important topic, and sort of the market is frothy, the multiples are high. This is happening for the past 2 decades in our domain, and it's interesting to see the outlook of the specialists on what's going to happen in the future and what may influence the industry. We usually don't do any formal presentations, but today we're lucky to have John, and he agreed to share some of the key findings from Brakke. So John, the floor is yours. I'm going to share your slides, and please tell me when to move forward with them. So let me just share the screen here.
Happy to do that.
And I think we should be live.
Yeah, you can. This title slide. You can go to the next one. Thanks. So I think a little history is good for perspective. VCA, Veterinary Centers of America, was established in 1986 and really started the consolidation of veterinary practices. It deployed a technique that was used in many other industries, which that is rolling up small locally owned businesses. And then over the, VCA got started, then over the years, there were a number of companies that kind of copied what VCA did. And many of those were acquired by VCA after they had 20 or 30 practices. One of the things I find interesting is during much of the 90s and early 2000s, the percentages of practices owned by consolidators was pretty steady at about 5 to 6%. The reason for that was that even though consolidators were buying practices, the number of practices in the industry was growing. So when VCA started, there were about 16,000 small animal clinics, and now there are roughly 30,000. So the size of the industry has doubled. But it was really following the Great Recession when the financial community saw that there was a great deal of resilience in the veterinary field, the animal health field in general, that investment in consolidation really took off. Next slide. So you can see here, this shows the trend. So 10 years ago, there were about 24,000 practices, about 6% were owned by consolidators. And today we're up to about 30,000 practices and about 20% of those. So while the number of practices has grown, the penetration of consolidation has outpaced that. Next slide. So 2020 was a banner year for consolidation. We calculate that about 1,000 practices in the US were acquired by consolidators. Certainly like everything else in the US, things shut down in March and April as we came to grips with the COVID pandemic. But then starting in late April, early May, things really started ramping up, and fourth quarter consolidation activity was just intense. We think it's possible that consolidator purchases even overtook independent transactions for the first time last year. And if we look at the current status, about 70% of specialty practices are owned by consolidators and more than 20% of general practices. What's interesting, though, is that because consolidators tend to acquire the larger practices, the share of pet care done by consolidators, we estimate, is now in the neighborhood of 35 to 40% of total pet care. Next. So why was activity so intense in 2020? I think there are a number of reasons. One is that 2020 was a banner year for many practices. Their income was up, which meant that their value was up. Many practices had revenues 20% or more over 2019. There's also a lot of demand. So the low interest rates made money cheap for the private equity firms that finance consolidation. And we now have about 50 or more consolidators that are competing for practices when they become available. I think another very important thing is that practices are much more widely shopped than they used to be. It was not uncommon a few years ago when a practice came up for sale that there might be 4 or 5 prospective buyers, maybe a couple of associates or neighboring veterinarian, plus maybe 1 or 2 consolidators. But now we know that when the bigger practices go on the market, they're often shopped to 30 to 50 consolidators, which has led to values really going up. So the value of good general practices have increased to 8 to 10 times EBITDA, up from 7 to 8 times just a year or so ago. And specialty practices have really ramped up in value to about 12 to 15 times EBITDA, up from about 10 to 12. And we've even heard of values well beyond that. And then there are a couple of environmental factors that we think are contributing to consolidation. One is that with these high valuations, we think a lot of owners want to make sure that they get in on it before maybe it slows down. So there's kind of a fear of missing out type thing where they want to go ahead and sell when the selling's good. And then with the election last November, people anticipating that if there was a change in administration, there may be a change in tax law. So wanting to get in on the most favorable tax environment that they could. So we think all those really contributing to a banner year for consolidation last year.
That makes sense, and quite the statistics there. And it looks like the multiples are not gonna, go down in the near future. But with that degree of opportunity that everybody's exploiting right now with 50, I heard, by our statistics at BIS, we counted, I think, 69 consolidators right now. So there's quite a few, and they're appearing every day, and that doesn't look like it's very sustainable, especially the strategy of arbitrage only, because there's two main sort of theses of consolidation. One is buy many practices at certain multiple and then sell them at a bigger multiple without too much of operational improvements. So it looks like with this saturation of the market, there might be it might be tough to just play with that, just with arbitrage, and some operational changes will be required for new consolidators that appear. But I have a question with that, for Kurt. So you are, you're obviously growing organically as a operator, and you mentioned before you're not planning to sell in the near future. So what are those benefits, and what's your sort of general attitude towards the consolidation, or versus growing organically versus building your own empire, if you will?
Sure. Yeah, I think honestly, right now, the number one reason why I stay owner operator is the profit. I mean, when practices are profiting 20% of their gross revenue year after year after year, it's nice just to keep that profit in my pocket for a while. I'm not upset about running a practice. I enjoy the leadership opportunities. I enjoy being an entrepreneur. I enjoy creating structure, and I enjoy watching people grow professionally and personally. So at this point in my life, I'm really happy with where I am, based on the fact that I'm totally in charge of my own culture and my practices. I'm totally in charge of every day-to-day decision. I have a great leadership team that helps me make all those decisions, and we're able to make them organically, as you said, also locally. So we run all of our decisions through our paradigms of our values and our vision and our planning, and we get to make those decisions on our own with a group of people that I completely trust. So profit keeps me. Leadership allows me to be happy, and if I'm going to sell in the future, it's going to have to be to the right company that allows me to use my strengths where they were needed, or I'm going to have a different plan in my life. And I'm only 52, so I guess my age is the third category that keeps me plugging along.
Excellent. With the competition where it is right now, we heard of the numbers that each practice is nurtured as a lead, if you will, by 40 to 50 brokers today. So it's a pretty tremendous inflow of calls in the hospital and how they manage them. John, you have a bit of statistics that you guys collected last year, I think, or this year, about the next year. So I wanted to maybe ask you to share those, and I'm going to show those on my screen here. Just switch to it. There we go. All right.
Hey, thanks. So in January of 2021, we conducted a survey of, I think, around 300 veterinary practices, and one of the questions we asked is if they were likely to sell in 2021, and there were, I think, 143 that answered that question, and 8% of them said yes, that they were likely to sell. Another 15% said that they may sell, but I think the 8% is probably the better number. And then we asked them if they were likely to sell to a consolidator, and that chart is on the right here. And on the one hand, it looks like many of them were not planning to sell to a consolidator, but two things I point out here. One is that we're dealing with a relatively small number of responses. So we can't take this data to the bank by any means. It's not projectable. But the other thing is, when we look at who answered this question, the ones that the practices that were in the somewhat or highly likely to sell were the big practices, and the ones that were in the not very likely or not at all likely to sell were much smaller in size. So even in this data, we see that that bigger practices are much more interested in selling to consolidators. And of course, consolidators want the big practices, right? They're less interested in the 1 or 2 doctor practices.
That makes sense. And yeah, this is interesting statistic, and you're right. The sample is maybe not that big, but maybe a representative of what's going to happen in next year. I think I heard it in the course I recently took. In God we trust, the rest bring data. So I think that this is the case. John, with that, why some consolidators are more attractive to the sellers than others? What are those specifics that that help consolidators to kind of break through the noise of this number of them?
Yeah, interesting. So there are a number of factors. One is, reputation. Some consolidators have been at it a lot longer than others, and so they've become better known than the newer ones. Size matters as well. The bigger consolidators have more people in the field that are out prospecting and calling on practices. They're more likely to show up exhibiting at veterinary conferences, at trade shows. They just have had an opportunity to establish their reputations. Now, that said, I think we see a number of smaller consolidators that are trying to get into the market. And I think one of the challenges is for those newer consolidators to differentiate themselves and to bring some new ideas or new concepts to the prospects, because it is a competition, as we pointed out earlier, with the extent to which practices are shopped. Each of the potential bidders is going to have to make a pretty strong case for why they should be the prevailing buyer.
Makes sense. And with that, we heard some feedback, from the practices that's being acquired or have been acquired, is that sometimes there's sort of a negative tone towards consolidators that are not owned by previous operators or veterinarians as the background. So Kurt, your team is all veterinarian as management team, and do you think that has a competitive advantage, especially on the talent market, because talent is scarce on both veterinary and staffing? So do you think that plays a role in when you're looking for talent?
I think, there's a difference between recruitment and retention in our talent. And I truly believe that the consolidators have it over on us every single day when it comes to recruitment. Their abilities to pass out a message nationally and to offer higher salaries, and honestly, I can meet their salaries, but what I can't oftentimes do is meet their benefits packages. With pet employee discounts, health insurance, other types of things. Their premiums are lower, and just because of their size. So recruitment's always been a challenge for us. And, at Cityway Animal Clinics, we've really spent the last year just beefing up our recruitment department and trying to get out there and get in front of these talent that are coming out, that are graduating, new techs, new nurses, new veterinarians. When it comes to an advantage for us is in the retention, for sure. I mean, I think we find it over and over and over again that once someone comes to join our team, and it's a family of local people who all know each other and work well with each other, and we build a great culture, and we put a lot of pride in our values and our decisions that we make locally. That's where I think we find an advantage is of keeping people. I talk to people every day who've been working at a large corporation practice, and they're thinking about making a move because they just don't get the support that they need from their regional managers. They don't get the salaries there, the benefits are there, but the happiness maybe isn't there. And so we just try to tell them all the time, think about joining a smaller team, someone who you have access to. Not every single day, but they can call me, they can talk to me, they can text me. We can get answers to them pretty quickly. And that is definitely an advantage for us.
100%. I love your differentiation. We just had another webinar that we did at another conference. We were talking about the happiness of veterinarians and why they're leaving the profession. And first reason is work-life balance. And the second one is culture. It's not the pay. The pay is number 3. So that's really important. And it seems like it's kind of coming up to the surface in your organization as well. Let's talk a little bit about the future. John, a couple years ago, you did a presentation which you titled Veterinary Practice Consolidation, a Bubble or Long-Term Trend. So I would like to share the slide on this that you gave us and maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so thank you. We think that within a year or two, corporations will, on general practices, will go over that 25% of total practice level. And when they get there, they're probably going to be doing about 50% of pet care. One of the questions, again, we've worked on a number of recapitalizations. And one of the questions that always comes up is how much runway is left? And, certainly we need to think of the market as being dynamic. The number of practices does increase, and the number of 3 and 4 doctor practices does increase each year. But certainly, typically about half of all practices have been 1 or 2 doctor. They're just not ideal for consolidation. There's a high degree of risk for consolidators. So they're going to pick from those, the 50% of the practices that are larger than that. And, the fact that the runway is getting shorter, I think, is indicated by the fact that now we see consolidators buying consolidators, right? So there are a number of the smaller consolidators have been acquired by bigger consolidators. And with a large number of consolidators out there, I think that's going to be a very significant trend. At the same time, we think there's a bright future for independent practitioners. Like Kurt said, we think that locally owned practices, entrepreneurial veterinarians can do very, very well. And when I speak at veterinary conferences, I encourage associates interested in owning to look at those 1 or 2 doctor practices, because those are, if they're in a good market, they can build on those and have a very, very comfortable living. So we think that consolidation is going to continue with some shift towards just shrinking the number of total consolidators, and but still a good opportunity for independent veterinarians.
That's great. And so maybe a follow-up question to that. What we see in the UK right now, there's a total sort of frenzy in what happened in, last 4 or 5 years. I remember I went to one conference, the London Vet Show, and it was 40% corporate, 60% independent. And then I went to the next one, it was the other way around. It was 60% corporate and then 40% private. So do you think that sort of, can we compare those two geographies and kind of plot our, plateau when we get to north of 60+%?
So, I think the UK and Australia is another market that is consolidating very, very, very rapidly. And, one thing to keep in mind is these are countries which, with a much smaller number of veterinary practices. I'd say that I can certainly envision a time in the not too many years in the future where consolidators may be doing 60% of the total pet care, getting up to 60% of total practices, which means that they'd probably be doing 85% or more of the pet care. I'm not sure we're going to hit that mark, but certainly I think we could get up into the 40-45% range pretty easily.
That makes sense. And with that, the groups need to differentiate themselves, and they also need to be future-proof. I love the fact that veterinary medicine survived COVID and proven to be immune to this virus, and that's why we have so many pets, and then the industry is growing. But with that, what is the future-proof consolidator? And we've seen different management styles, and we work at VIS with multiple consolidators, and there's some groups that had a platform developed within it. And some of them adopted other platforms. So, for example, I know that Pathway adopted the framework that, Kurt, you're operating your business with, and it's an entrepreneurial operating system, or Attraction, by Gino Wickman. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that and this methodology and how it helped you to apply to your business and to scale?
Sure. I had a practice, my first practice that I purchased, I ran it just willy-nilly. didn't really have a goals or a plan. And, at the end of every month, there was money left in the bank. And so everything was copacetic, and we were growing every year, 12 to 17%, and was proud of that, proud of where I was practicing, proud of my patient care, proud of all the things, except for just the way I was running my businesses. So when I started my companies in the downtown market of Indianapolis, Indiana, I made a solid, idea to change how I was running my companies. And about 2.5 to 3 years ago, we instituted the Entrepreneur Operating System, which, as you said, is a book called Traction by Gino Wickman, wherein he outlines an entire system of how to run any business, from manufacturing to advertising to accounting to veterinary medicine. And I think that, unfortunately, our industry is always a little bit conservative in terms of jumping in on new methodologies. And this is essentially a culmination of a lot of different methodologies and a lot of different books. Gino did a great job of putting an abridged version together of everything, and then giving you a very specific system in which to utilize it. So, the system helps you set visions, your values, your goals. It helps you create accountability within your organization. It helps you create organization within your organization, because, let's be frank, many organizations aren't very organized. It helps you to analyze the data on a regular basis. It helps you create to-dos for all of your team members, things for them to be working on a regular basis. It helps you bring your 10-year plan down into a 3-year goal, into a 1-year picture, and then into 30-day rocks. And the rocks are essentially goals that each person on your team is working towards, and the accountability comes into play there. So as they're working on a major goal, everybody's helping them, everybody's keeping them accountable, everybody's saying, hey, are you going to finish this goal by June 30th or not? Where are we with this? And then it also helps set processes, so at Cityway, we call it the Cityway way. And it's just the way in which we do everything, from how do we set up to analyze a urine sample in our clinics, to how do we greet a patient and a client coming in the door, to how do we do end of life discussions. And so although it's not corporatized to the point where everybody has to play by every single role the same way, it's a scenario in which we are all working towards a common goal. And as the owner, as a CEO, as the founder of this company, that's my number one thing, is just I want to build a team that's all working towards a final goal. And the Entrepreneur Operating System is the only methodology in my business career so far that has allowed me to be fully successful at that.
That's excellent. I love Traction. We applied it for, probably every business in the last 8 years I worked in. And it was guys at Vets, what's the other online pharmacy? Not Vets First Choice, but the other one, VetSource. So they they suggested that to me a number of years ago. And then I adopted it for SmartFlow, and then we applied it at IDEX at the software division. I think it's excellent. And that's why we chose it at the core of Consolidated Operating Framework that we created for consolidators. It's sort of like, we try to create a cookbook for consolidation. So that's, if anybody's interested, just you can visit vetintegrations.com to get familiar with it. And it's not, there's no silver bullet for everything, but it's sort of a guide that may help you to think that, I didn't think about that. But with that, any methodology is really created to outline the processes, make them scalable, and then set the goals and achieve them. So just like you described, Kurt. But with the scarcity of veterinarians and with the abundance of the pets, we're really reaching that point where the demand is much higher than supply, and that's really our danger sort of in the profession. And it seems like we're still very linear in the approach that we add more people, we can see more appointments, therefore we can produce more revenue. And my personal hypothesis is that we really need to think outside of the box and rediscover the more scalable workflows and more scalable operational sort of tactics that can help us to do more with less. And we're not hiring veterinarians and pushing them to do more, because we also have an issue of burnout and then pushing that to the limit. And it's really about discovering new sort of processes and new workflows and new, maybe new revenue elements. So John, do you see any trends in that direction, how to do more with less in our industry?
Yes, so I think the industry has struggled with a pretty inefficient business model for a long time, and has not worked as hard as other medical professions to figure out more efficient workflows. Certainly if you compare veterinary medicine to human medicine, where you may have 3 exam rooms for every doctor and a lot more of the work is done by nurses and that sort of thing. I think, veterinarians prefer to be very, very hands-on. And I think also veterinarians are kind of addicted to the idea of when someone calls for an appointment, they want to get them in tomorrow or the next day, instead of stretching out appointments and utilizing some of the typical downtime that happens in every week, whether it's Wednesday mornings or Thursday afternoons, whatever time tends to be less busy than others. I think if veterinarians can get in the habit of scheduling appointments, routine exams, annual exams, 2 and 3 weeks out instead of tomorrow, I think that will help workload out a lot. I think another thing is that what I hear from young veterinarians is that they don't feel that that their needs are as accommodated in many practices. If the practice has 20-minute appointments, somebody that's just a year out of school or less maybe needs 30 minutes per appointment. So I think, considering the needs of individual practitioners, how they manage their time and what kind of support they have, I think those things are also very important.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And so, Kurt, in your experience, same sort of question. How do we deal with the shortage of vets now? I know it's hard to hire, and you mentioned there's different ways to attract and retain. But are there ways to scale the processes so you kind of do more with less human capital?
I used to think that, I used to be a big follower of, Dr. Ernie Ward a long time ago talked about how you mobilize your staff and how you alternate your schedule in 20-minute blocks. And so the doctors do diagnosis, prescribe, and do surgery, and that's it. And it was easier in an environment where, maybe veterinary technicians and veterinary assistants and just helpers, in the back, lots of CSRs were available. And, today in a post-COVID world, that's also a struggle. So not only are we struggling to find veterinary talent, but we're struggling to find qualified veterinary nurses and veterinary assistants to help with that back of the house, processes. So the struggle is real right now for sure. So, we talk a lot about, as John was talking about, spreading out time, spending more time with patients than less. I've empowered my veterinary team to say no more often. Luckily, I live in a metropolitan area that has 5 to 6, 24/7 veterinary clinics within a short drive. So if we can't see the patient, if it's not the best thing for the patient for us to squeeze them in when they're really, really sick, we empower our veterinary team to say, we just can't see you today. We analyze white space regularly, weekly, and my white space numbers are down. I mean, there's very few opportunities for people to see a veterinarian in my practice. And like John said, strategic, forward scheduling and things like that has helped, but you still get those people who call the day of and need to get in. And so we just have to make sure that we put patients first. That's our number one value. And when we stop putting patients first, then that's not the reason why I became a veterinarian.
There's a bit of a technical hiccup on Kurt's side. So yeah, that makes complete sense. Yeah, sorry, Kurt. I think I cut you off because you were a little bit frozen there.
Oh, sorry about that.
I totally agree with your and I'm more and more I hear this is interesting about saying no and be actually selective about your customers. We always when I graduated, it was always the customer is always right. You do everything for the customer. But I love that you are talking about, first of all, think about the patient, not just the customer, because the customer is annoyed or has to wait or whatever it is. Because I don't remember very often where it's anywhere you call, it's 2-week wait time for spay or dental or anything like that. So it's definitely demand is overwhelming. I was just talking to a colleague of mine in the UK, and they're talking about the burnout angle of this. And they said that we're becoming very selective about our customers, and the wellness plans are in general, there's a big better adoption in Europe. So in the UK, I think there's about 20% adoption rate for insurance by the owners, and we're like at 2, I think. But in some clinics, they actually starting differentiating and say, if you don't think that wellness plan that covers things that should be covered is a part of how much you want to care, after your pet, then you're probably not the best customer for us. So they're actually being, quite straightforward with the customers that, if you're not a very good customer, then maybe we don't need you. So it's interesting how, this is changing in these days. I also have, we also talked about, because the revenues are shrinking because of, the online pharmacies and now the Chewy and the Amazon and things like that. Is there anything sort of creative that clinics are doing right now? And it's sort of a question to both of you guys. New revenue streams, diversification into doing more, spa sort of services. I know, Kurt, you have been working with that. And pharma sort of new workflows. I know there's a couple of startups that are doing sort of alternative route to online pharmacy, is sort of like your own pharmacy, but still delivered home. So are there new sort of revenue diversification, for the better word, that you guys can comment on, either John or Kurt?
We have a spa, as you said. It's not profitable. It's not a profit generator for us. It's not a loser, but it stays pretty stable. We do it because we offer more services to our clients in the downtown area. We like to keep our people close and in the family. And so when they start seeking that elsewhere, we just feel like we might have some lost opportunities there. Our bigger push has been in professional services away from pharmaceuticals. We've grabbed completely the bull by the horns when it comes to online pharmacies through utilizing VetSource and script sharing. Anything that we talk about, we just automatically send the client a prescription for that, and that has helped our revenues go up. And as far as that goes, but without all the work, I think a practice that's too heavily loaded on pharmaceutical sales is also at a risk, and consolidators aren't super excited about them because that revenue stream can go away any minute now. That's why we're talking about ProHeart 6, ProHeart 12, the products that Convenia injections that are only delivered by veterinarians. So that's what the people are paying us for, which is our professional opinion and the services that we can provide to them. So that's where we've focused most of our efforts on. And although I have a spa, it's just kind of a fun thing for us, honestly.
Yeah, so certainly in our data, we've seen the growth of the home delivery market and online ordering for veterinarians, and there's now I think we're seeing like 70% of practices have that service, and they're working through companies like VetSource, as Kurt mentioned, or Covetrus, or My Vet Store. I think there's a couple of other ones that are smaller. I live in downtown Chicago, and one of the things I see is veterinary practices offering ancillary services. So there is one practice, I see their van go by where they offer pickup and delivery of pets for either appointments or for their kennel, their daycare. We also, see on-site grooming vans where their vans will go to the home and give the pet a shampoo, do the grooming on the pet owner's site. And then there's some in-home services where when you get into highly densely populated neighborhoods where there may be hundreds of pet owners in a high-rise building, we see some veterinarians offering their in-home services there. So those are ways that veterinarians are expanding their footprint. And I also remember talking to a veterinarian in Dallas, Texas. This was probably about 3 years ago, but they got into the vaccine service business where they go to an HEB grocery store or whatever and set up on a Saturday. And they weren't using it as a competition with their regular practice. They were using it to identify pet owners that didn't have a regular veterinary practice. And so they were doing a preliminary exam on a pet and using that to bring pets into the practice. And I'm not sure how many practices these days are looking for new ways of generating business, but certainly those things can.
Makes sense. There are a couple questions from the audience that I thought were interesting and a good conversation to have. So one of them, and I think there's a couple people asked, what can consolidators do to make vets want to work for them? Kurt, do you have
We're talking
an
about
opinion on that?
so veterinarians that are selling to the consolidators, or you're saying once they are consolidated, how can they recruit other veterinarians?
I think it's more of the latter. Yeah. Just how do they recruit so people want to work for them more?
Well, I know how they're recruiting now. Like I said earlier, they're offering higher salaries and they're giving better benefits. I think that what they need to do is to work on mentorship and leadership growth potential for their people, and also identifying, during the interview process, if that's something that the candidate wants or desires. I'm going to go a little off topic here, but I think that where I'm frustrated is I don't know that we're looking for those types of candidates when we're matriculating them from undergrad to veterinary school now. I wish veterinary schools would do a little bit better job of seeking out the type of candidates who are interested in clinical practice and interested in business ownership and business management and leadership, stylings, because when we continue to admit students who have very little desire to practice clinical veterinary medicine in the future, we wonder why we have a shortage of veterinarians 10 years later. I feel like that rides on the veterinary schools. So consolidators could do the same. I know that's one of the things, we put every one of our new graduates, any new hire through a mentorship program. The support staff does their own version, the CSRs do their own version, and veterinarians have their own version. And we talk a lot about professional growth and leadership and mentorship and how to communicate. So that's what we're doing. I think that the consolidators could mimic what I do a little bit better, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it depends. I agree with Kurt. I think it depends on the consolidator to some extent. Some of them, I think, do a very, very good job of operations, even some of the very, very large ones. And I think one of the things that a company can do, a consolidator can do, is to offer a clear-cut career path to veterinarians. When you have an organization that covers multiple locations and has a corporate infrastructure, those veterinarians that seek to go into management someday can, if there's a career path opportunity, they can mentor them, and towards that, and many consolidators now are offering ownership opportunities where veterinarians can have ownership either in the company as a whole or in the particular location where they practice. So I do think there are a number of tools that consolidators and any practice can use, as Kurt said, to make sure that they're really productive, welcoming, and growth work environment for veterinarians and staff, for that matter. I think one of the soft underbellies of practice is that we haven't offered career paths to non-veterinarians. So it's hard for them to see, once they start as high school kids, how they could possibly work there when they're 30 years old, right? Because how can they survive on the kind of salaries? And I think that some practices have done a better job of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with both of you guys. We just yesterday had a pretty advanced conversation about this. As if you look at our profession, technicians are not going beyond sort of 30 years old. So that means that our profession cannot offer enough pay for people for adult life. You can't sustain, with the technician salary. So definitely, probably compensating better our staff technicians that do most of the work, in my opinion. And then basically what you said, Kurt, I really like that. Finding out what people want. And we've been talking a lot about this in several webinars by VIS, but it's really understanding the intrinsic motivation of the person, because it's always different for different people. Everybody gets a job to get paid, but what is it that drives you to come to work and actually want to stay here for long term? And I think that this is it's extremely important to have, the series of webinars that we're doing is called Leading with Purpose. Is if your purpose and if your goal of the organization is aligned with the intrinsic motivation of the person, that's the key to having happy people working for you and sharing your purpose. But if your purpose is to recap in 2 years, that's not the purpose that they have. So unfortunately, there's a very little buy-in to that, and then people can leave. Sure, you can throw money at them for a certain period of time, but after you're 75K and over, the statistics show that we're not very much motivated, because that meets the basic needs. So yeah, no, absolutely, I agree with you guys. There's another interesting question here, a slightly different angle on this sort of lab services. So the question is from Rachel. I've seen a lot of practices underutilize their laboratory services. Are consolidators considering leveraging the lab? Just jump in, guys.
Well, I think that many consolidators focus on standards of care, and they tend to be pretty good customers for some of the diagnostic companies, and yeah, I mean, I think diagnostics are one of the services that that clients have a hard time saying no to, because you can present a pretty good rationale for why this pet needs blood work, and particularly, all the things that a lot of veterinarians were taught in school, but maybe didn't practice, like pre-anesthesia blood work, even for young pets and that sort of thing. So I think that leveraging that is a very important revenue source. And I think when I looked at data from some of the consolidators, some of them do a pretty good job of leveraging diagnostics, and not just blood work and urinalysis and those things, but also radiology.
Yeah. I think a lot of that comes back to just, are they measuring their work? Do you have someone on your team, on the leadership team, who's looking at data and deciding that, hey, it seems like we're doing the right amount of diagnostics. It seems like we're doing enough blood work. It seems like we're taking enough x-rays, doing enough ultrasounds. But when you start to look at the actual data, you'll see that your profit or your margins, as far as like as compared to gross revenue, perhaps maybe your radiology is down in the 2 or 3% category, and it should really be 4 to 6% of your gross revenue. And when you identify that, it's a simple fix. Either you're not charging enough for your x-rays or your ultrasounds, or you're not doing enough of them. And if you take that opportunity to look at that data and have a healthy discussion with your doctoral staff, all in one, is my suggestion. Meet regularly. Our doctors have a monthly meeting where they can share their ideas, and there's a little bit of data crunching that happens there. Say, hey guys, it appears that at one of our practices we're not doing enough radiology. Is that because you don't like the machine? Is that because the caseload? Is that because, what is it? Because as compared to another one that's it's 2 miles away, it's quite vastly different numbers. And so that's been helpful to us. And those are things I didn't do in the first 10 years of owning a practice. It was just like, whatever came across on the appointment schedule, we just did it, and that was it. But we didn't actually plan for things. So,
yeah, I cannot agree more. I think that what we're seeing more and more in consolidation is that the data that they're looking at, for the most part, stays at the corporate level.
yeah.
And I've been always surprised how the organization that measures their productivity based on a certain metrics doesn't provide those metrics to people that generate those metrics. So essentially, you're getting them once a quarter with a month delay because of our data that it is in the veterinary domain. And then after that, you're presenting it to people post factum, and then they just can't, care about that. So, one of the things that we're doing at the IS, we have this product that we're about to launch that actually serves the right data to right people at the right time. You can always look in your pocket in your phone and see, okay, what are those metrics that we all agreed as an organization that we're going to follow? And it's not necessarily that you have to tie the compensation to the metrics, but productivity and do you fit into our team? I think it's very important, because I love that you compared your team to family. I like that. I like to refer to the team as well as the team like a sports team, because we love everybody. But if you don't play to the certain level, then that you don't fit in our team. And I think that that's very important. A lot of operators, though, they're shy to serve metrics to veterinarians. Some veterinarians don't like to see metrics, but it's usually those that are not performing well. So maybe it is the people that you need to, to inform about that. And remembering that veterinary medicine is, it is a form of art. I love, the emergency and everything else, but it does generate revenue and it feeds the people that are on the team, and it generates for the company overall. So I think that's very important to have the right data in the right hands. And back to the lab, I think I love the comment. I want to quote, I don't know if John Ayers stole it from someone who came out with it, but I had a pleasure working with John Ayers when he was the CEO of IDEX in my year at IDEX. And I remember one thing that he kept saying about blood work, and I thought it was phenomenal, that lab work gives the sort of the ability to the pet to talk to their owners. You're interpreting what's going on with them. And I thought that was brilliant, especially for IDEX, because they're 95% of business is lab work, but that's true. If you don't know, your dog can tell you that it's slightly uncomfortable somewhere. But if you take the blood work and you have quite sensitive tests that can detect early kidney disease, liver disease, and, everything else, then you're really kind of monitoring your pet to a different level. And back to sort of wellness plans, if that's very well articulated to the owners, and then that wellness plan includes the annual lab work, I think that closes the loop on, on the care of pets that we're expecting from our owners and everything else. So yeah, I really like that from John Ayers. So
yeah, I agree with that. I'd like to circle back just briefly on something Kurt said. That's the data sharing. I think that I've worked in the business for a long, long time, and I've seen a lot of companies, and to me, one of the things that really differentiates companies is how much information they give their employees. And most of the really good, well-managed companies that I've worked with are companies that they tell their employees everything. I mean, they just are very open about how the business is doing, how they're measuring their progress. And it's not always about revenue. I mean, it can be, how they measure up on employee benefits, or, what their policies are and how those generate data. The number of days lost to illness or sickness, those kinds of things. And I think the more information that employees have about the operation of the business down at the practice level, the more they can see themselves in the practice and how they impact those numbers.
Absolutely, I agree with that. There's another question here on, I think it's a very good one. What do ownership opportunities look like for recent veterinary graduates, given the consolidation trend in the veterinary medicine?
I tell people every day that when I recruit is that you have the opportunity to be a part of this company going forward, but I have a very, very clear 10-year plan that I've placed in place mainly for myself and for my family, of retirement and leaving this company and getting paid for what I've built. And I tell them, with the right group of people, and as we talked about earlier, they don't have to all be veterinarians. You can structure it in such a way that non-veterinary professionals can have a piece of the pie. And I think we should be heralding that, more often. I have a chief operating officer who's been with me for, upwards of 9 years. He started as a kennel kid, 11 years ago. And now he's my second in command, and he's extremely valuable to me, and he's very important to our company. And I hope and pray that someday he'll have a bigger piece of the pie than he has right now. That's something that we as private owners can offer, comparative to going to work for VCA or Banfield tomorrow. You're never going to be a leader or an owner there, and if you think you are, it's not going to happen. So maybe I misspoke about the Banfield opportunity. It does have some ownership opportunities, but you're not going to be able to own a VCA. So that's where we are. That's how we recruit. That's how we stand apart. For sure, is encouraging entrepreneurship. And if you have good books, if we're profiting as well as we're profiting, banks will loan the money to the people who need it, for sure.
Yeah. John, do you have a comment on that?
I think there are excellent ownership opportunities for veterinarians, and of all the professional categories, veterinarians have among the lowest risk for lenders. So getting money to buy or start a practice is not that challenging. I sometimes humorously say that if you have a DVM degree and can fog a mirror, you can get a loan for a practice. And
That's good. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
and but I think again, they're just excellent. And when I speak at conferences, I encourage young veterinarians to seek ownership because because overall owners make more than associates. And with levels of student debt that people have coming out of vet school, they can pay off that debt faster if they're getting owner money versus associate money. And I think that one of the things is differentiating some of the consolidators is that they're providing ownership opportunities to some of their associates, and that is differentiating them from those that don't have any mechanism for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's an important factor. And I love what you're doing, Kurt, in your organization. And I think that the inclusion of the veterinary staff is sort of the destiny where the consolidation is going to, because we will have shortage of those as well, especially if we have such a short window of people that are getting into that profession and qualified, and then they retire from this profession because they can't sustain their spend on this. So I think that the business models that will include everybody into sort of sharing the pie, I think this is what we're seeing in the near future. And so we have another question on, so if something, and I think, John, maybe that's to you or for both of you guys. So rapid consolidation, and then this is, frothy environment, the multiples are high. If something can slow down the consolidation of clinics, what is it?
Well, there's two things I think. One is that, all the good clinics that want to sell will have been acquired, right? And not all of them are going to want to sell. So a lot of people like Kurt are going to want to remain independent for a long time. So we don't have an infinite number of practices. The other thing that we've been blessed with having really good private equity partners in consolidating veterinary practices. We have not had any implosions, and at least any sizable. And some industries have gone through that, where a private equity firm comes in, loads a newly acquired company with a lot of debt, and then drives it into the ground and takes a lot of money in fees and that sort of thing. And I think, given the nature of veterinarians and their sensitivity towards debt repayment and so forth, if we had an implosion of a major consolidator because of poor private equity practices, I think that would really almost stop the desire of veterinarians to sell to a private equity backed company. But again, I haven't seen that happen. Again, I've worked with many of the private equity companies, and they're really good managers, and I don't expect that to happen. But if it did, I think that would have a big impact on the profession.
Thank you. Kurt, do you have any?
I go back to my earlier discussion about veterinary schools need to do better. We are graduating graduates every single year who don't even know what they want to do. We're forcing them into scenarios. Well, the veterinary schools are highly suggesting scenarios that aren't really ripe for fighting consolidators. We're not encouraging business ownership. We're not encouraging business management courses. We're not teaching them anything about business at all. And I hear over and over and over again that we're telling I say the profession, and I'm specifically talking about the veterinary school administrators and people who are telling this, who have access to the students, are telling them, you have to find a job that has a commission-based salary, and I don't believe that's the truth. And I don't think that we should be forcing every single kid who wants to practice in clinical practice to be a specialist either. We need general practitioners and we need owners. And I'm really proud of this profession, and I'm proud of how we were able to serve our patients at a local and organic level. And if these trends continue, and we continue to choose the wrong students who don't care about the profession 30 years from now, then the profession will look quite differently in 30 years. No doubt about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree with that. The quality of the students that we have, both from business perspective as well as the professional skills, I think it's sort of, it's changing, to say the least. And especially on like skills like surgery, that's been a big challenge, I think, that we're graduating veterinarians that are not.
Zero surgical
But
skill.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also related to sort of the generation. I've been talking about this in some other webinars, and I think that sort of the majority of veterinarians right now are in sort of that millennial time frame, and they just care more about work-life balance, and there's different ethics to work, I think, that they're valuing. So well, with that, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for participation. That's been great. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your expertise added to this webinar.
You bet.
Thanks very much.